Who wrote Ecclesiastes? Solomon. Now, as we discuss Ecclesiastes with all of our friends, does everybody believe Solomon wrote Ecclesiastes? Absolutely not. Matter of fact, the vast majority of people do not believe Solomon wrote Ecclesiastes. Even though we look at the characteristics, especially in the first 3 chapters that describe someone who's a king, a son of David, the vast majority of theologians don't do that. The most prominent person to put that out would be Martin Luther in 1619. And a lot of people believe that to this day. They think as we go on, and we're going to see things start entering in concepts that are similar to Greek philosophy. Other analogies and other words that hint to a later date. But did Solomon say those things first? Or the vast majority of theologians say, no, this was written later after the exile, maybe as late as 250 BC. And they tag Solomon's name on it to give it credibility. From time to time, I get to speak to a local rabbi, and we're having this discussion, and he absolutely does not believe that Solomon wrote this book. So we're going to start to see other concepts that enter in that we're familiar with from other philosophies. That'll sort of ring a bell to you, but did those philosophies steal from Solomon? Who knows? I like to take things at surface value. I'm a simple-minded person, and if the author said he's the son of David, the king of Jerusalem, I think that's Solomon. But we're going to start to see some other things crop in. All right, as we talked about, our study of Ecclesiastes is an old man trying to impart his wisdom. Don't do as I did. I've made mistakes in my life. Don't make the same mistakes. We've all heard the term, the sky's the limit. When somebody says the sky's the limit, how do you perceive that? Is that stingy? That's an overwhelming abundance. But Solomon viewed life as the sky's the limit because he viewed it under the sun. And we see how depressed and despondent he was. So, the sky's the limit seems abundant unless you have a view of heaven. And how much better off are we having a view of heaven? So the sky's not our limit, is it? Because we've got a destination beyond the sky. We're heaven bound, and we have a heaven mindset. If we are living with a kingdom mindset, then we're not living under the sun. And that's the challenge of Ecclesiastes. It's from a negative point of view. Everything is, don't do like I did. It's not a message of hope. It's a message of, this is the depressing life you're going to have if you have no hope and don't have a kingdom view. So what's the meaning of life? Well, we all know that the infinite soul can't find meaning in a finite world. But simply put, the meaning of life is that life has no meaning because we have a view of heaven. We have an abundant view beyond this earth. Jesus said, you do not realize now what I'm doing, but later you'll understand. Solomon didn't have the whole view, did he? He just had a partial view. And even though he was the smartest man in the world at this time, we see the struggles that he had. And we know that certainly he had drifted away from the true belief. Now, the first 3 chapters essentially were his experiment, his grand experiment. And he said, my life has been a failure. I haven't found any meaning. Chapter 3, he says, you know what? God's providential hand controls everything. And then he drifts into death because he's confronted with his own mortality. How old is Solomon? He's a, quote, old man. How old is old? Solomon's going to die at 59 after 40 years in reign. So Keep that in mind. And as we go throughout this book from this point forward, we see him confront his own mortality more and more as he looks for meaning. We had a transition last week as when we went into chapter 5, all of a sudden God came in. And for someone who was really despondent and downcast, all of a sudden there's this bit of brightness as he brings God in. And then from there, he goes into the discourse about the vanity of wealth. All right, so we talked about this section from 5:8 to 6:9, which is going to conclude the first half of the book. It's a chiastic structure. People can't be satisfied. You can't enjoy life. Here's what really is good, and then the pinnacle is enjoy the moment. Enjoy the gift that God gives you at this present time. Whatever gift God gives you, and it may be a gift of misfortune, but that misfortune or that hardship may be God's gift because it's going to bring about the providential working of something else in God's ultimate plan. And then he'll mirror that back with what is bad. He'll repeat what people can enjoy from another point of view, and then about people that can't be satisfied. So even though this is a rambling discourse of an old man, and we've talked to old people and old men who ramble and they go off on tangents, and if you read this whole book from start to finish, it seems like a rambling discourse, that there's no structure, there's no rhyme or reason. When we start looking at things and you look at the repeats of language, we see that there is very elegant structure in there that's hidden within it. And I think we're going to see that more tonight. We looked at chapter 3. We looked at everything has a season. There's that chiastic structure, but it was A, B, B, A. Those repeats back and forth. We're going to see it on a bigger scale. We're going to see different subsets and different concepts that will go across different sections. And certainly, when this was written, there was no chapter divide. So all this is man-made. So we've got to look at the beauty of the language, try to gain the moment and the thought that he's included. So we covered verses 8 through 12 last week about people who can't be satisfied, and then he goes into verse 13 of chapter 5, people who can't find enjoyment on earth. There's a grievous evil I have seen under the sun. Riches were kept by their owner to his hurt. And those riches were lost in a bad venture. And he is father of a son, but he has nothing in his hand. As he came forth from his mother's womb, he shall go again, naked as he came, and shall take nothing for his toil that he may carry away with his hand. This is also a grievous evil. Just as he came, so shall he go. And what gain is there to him who toils for the wind? Moreover, all his days he eats in darkness, in much vexation and sickness and in anger. So what does he describe as a grievous evil? Two things he calls a grievous evil. What are they? Riches, but riches in themselves aren't bad, are they? Okay, so this obsession with wealth has been self-consuming. That individual who's so consumed with the love of wealth and trying to hoard and not use it for a godly purpose is self-consumed, and they've destroyed themselves. Now, we talked early on in lesson 1 about the concept of lex talionis. They had the mindset of, as you sow, you'll reap. So if you had a good harvest, it's because you're a godly person. If some misfortune befell you, it's because that was your punishment for doing wrong. That was a concept Job's friends had, didn't they? Job, you've encountered all this misfortune. You've obviously sinned. And they did everything they could to be faithful evangelists to get him to repent. You know, we condemn his friends, but they're trying to give him a message of repentance based on their limited view. Because you had to sin. But it became obvious, and we all know from Job, and Solomon said is that misfortune can befall you, and yet you're a godly person. It rains on the good and the evil. So, it's a grievous evil because riches were lost in a bad venture. So, adversity can happen. Misfortune that can happen that's not of your own fault. That wasn't brought about by any sinful act. And it's not a condemnation of your righteousness. So you can't count on riches. People put security in riches, don't they? I've got this abundance. I've got these resources. What happens? The ship sinks. The locusts come. Where are my riches? Do they provide security for me? As he came from his mother's womb, he shall go again. Have we heard that concept in the Bible before? Who said that before? Job. Job was frustrated. He said, I brought nothing. I'm going to take nothing away. We see that repeated in the New Testament. It's a grievous evil. You can't take anything away with you. And he talks about if you're rich, if you do have wealth, and it was gained rightfully, they viewed that as a sign of righteousness. But it's not going to benefit you. It's not going to benefit you at all in the grave. Another thing he mentioned, he's the father of his son, but has nothing in his hand. So this misfortune is going to affect the next generation. The mindset of this people was having a legacy, having an inheritance, because you want to provide something for the next generation. But we're going to see this concept stressed once again. They live for their own generation, means they only care for themselves. They don't think about the future. Mike? All right. We see what's going to happen to the kingdom. It's just going to collapse. All right. So he tells us certain people can't find enjoyment on earth. They're unable to find enjoyment and satisfaction. They can't find enjoyment. So what is good? Beginning in 18 through 20. Behold, what I have seen to be good and fitting is to eat and drink and find enjoyment in all the toil with which one toils under the sun, the few days of his life that God has given him. For this is his lot. Everyone also to whom God has given wealth and possessions and power to enjoy them and to accept his lot and rejoice in his toil. This is the gift of God. For he will not much remember the days of his life because God keeps him occupied with joy in his heart. So he said, I've seen from personal experience. I know this is what's good. Eat, drink, and find enjoyment. Has he said this before? We've heard this multiple times, haven't we? But what sort of enjoyment does he want? He said, this is God's gift. Enjoy it soberly in light of who provided this providential gift for you. Enjoy it with moderation. So, Paul writing in Acts says, satisfying your hearts with food and gladness. So, God has provided these things. If God provided it for us, we should enjoy them. He gave them for our benefit. for our satisfaction, for our joy. He doesn't want us to live the ascetic life like a monk with all these artificial constraints. He wants us to live an abundant life. And what is our response to this? If we have a gift, our response is gratitude. He said, that's good. So even though Solomon had all this disjoint life and had all these struggles, he still recognized what is good. He could find the core principles, and we see all these core principles repeated over and over. Who remembers February 3rd, 3 weeks ago? That was a train derailment in northern Illinois that we see in the news to this day. February 3rd is gone from our memory. He will not much remember the days of his life because God keeps him occupied. We've had beloved members of our congregation who passed on. They're gone no more. We miss them. They're in our hearts. But we don't think about them, do we? Just like February 3rd, that day is a vapor. All of a sudden, we're triggered with something that makes us think about an event that happened on that day. If we combed our memory without that trigger, it's gone. And he focuses on what a vapor life is. It's a vapor. You're not going to much remember the days of your life, and where you're gone, there's not going to be much memory of you. But God keeps you occupied. Does God want us to live in the past? No. Eat, drink, and find enjoyment in the toil that you toil under the sun in the day of your life. You worked hard. You earned that harvest. Be thankful to God. That's God's gift. You don't have the past. And who controls your future? Providential hand of God. You know, if you, again, soberly and moderately. So, what you know, moderate is your definition of moderate. You have to come up with your definition. So, I will not define that for you, and I will leave that to your discretion to determine what is moderate. So, he tells us what is good. And again, this is the, I try to label things because we see repeats back and forth. In chapter 4, verses 7 through 12, he talks about the miser, the individual who's married to his wealth. This is the carpe diem passage. Carpe diem, seize the day. Seize the day. Eat, drink, and find enjoyment because you've put forth toil. You've put forth labor to gain that harvest, and God's given you this gift and this abundance. Take advantage of it. And then right in the middle of this chiastic structure, so people who can't enjoy, people who can't be satisfied, this is what's good. He's going to say, here's your summary, verse 20. Live in the moment. The summation verse, the summation sentences, if you read all the different commentators, the simplest summation sentence of Ecclesiastes I saw was summed up in this passage. Eat dessert first, you're going to die. When we have pleasures in life, they're God's gift from his gracious hand. Be thankful. But enjoy those gifts in light of eternity. Because he's already talked about a judgment, and he's going to talk more about the judgment as he confronts his own mortality. So, we know that if godliness with contentment is great gain, if we're content, we have God in our hearts, we're going to have inner peace. We're going to find satisfaction. All right. Moving on to chapter 6. He just told us from 5:18 to 20, I've seen what is good. Here's the other side of the coin. There is an evil I have seen under the sun, and it lies heavy on mankind. The man whom God gives wealth, possessions, and honor, so that he lacks nothing, all that he desires. Yet God does not give him the power to enjoy them, but a stranger enjoys them. This is vanity. This is a grievous evil. So what's bad? He said, I've seen this evil. This is the bad thing. This is the bad side of the coin. Wealth, possessions, and honor, those don't sound like bad things, do they? I don't like anything. But what's happened? Again, he can't enjoy them. Why can't he enjoy them? Well, someone else is, but he's so consumed, God does not give him the power to enjoy them. Just like we're on a journey. We're pilgrims on this earth, and our destination is heaven. This individual is that consumed with wealth, and we're going to see more in this chapter, they're so consumed with gaining wealth and gaining possessions, they don't enjoy what they have. When we look at these passages, and he talks about wealth, what's the concept of wealth at this time of life in history? We're 1000 BC. In the kingdom of Israel, in 1000 BC, in Solomon's reign, what is the concept of wealth? What would constitute wealth to these people? That's exactly right. Because just like in the model prayer, he gave thanks for the daily bread. 95+% of the people in the kingdom of Israel were subsistence farmers. They were concerned about the daily bread. When we see passages about the corruption of politics, why was that included? Because could a subsistence farmer gain a lot of wealth? Certainly the nation had gained great wealth. They paved the streets with silver, according to the analogy that is written. So the nation had abundance, and it raised the standard of living in the country. But could they gain great abundance as subsistence farmers? Now, who can gain abundance? A corrupt politician who's taking a bribe, a corrupt judge who's taking a bribe. And that's why we see that, because those people who are consumed with gain and wealth and abundance would take unrighteous means of gain. So that's why we see these little sprinkles about bribery and corruption in politics. So wealth of these people is more than what you need for your daily living. And they have great appreciation for that. The interesting thing, wealth, possessions, and honor. When God blesses Solomon, that's the exact phrase that is used in First Chronicles. Solomon's saying, is he talking about himself? I think he is. I think he's making a true statement. You know, a man gives wealth, possessions, and honors so that you lack nothing that you desire. He always told us, I pursued anything I wanted. I didn't say no to any desire. God does not give him the power to enjoy him. Now, as we've looked at Solomon, does Solomon seem like a happy guy? No, he's depressed. He's despondent. He's frustrated. He's worrying about his own mortality. He's got a lot of struggle. I think that's very autobiographical right there. He can't enjoy him, and it's vanity, and it weighs heavy on his heart. All right, the next section. This is the mirror. This is talking about the people who can't enjoy things. And this mirrors 5:13 through 17. If a man fathers 100 children and lives many years, so that his days of his years are many, but his soul is not satisfied with life's good things, and he also has no burial, I say that a stillborn child is better off than he. For it comes in vanity and goes in darkness, and in darkness its name is covered. Moreover, it has not seen the sun or known anything, yet it finds rest rather than he. Even though he should live 1,000 years twice over, yet enjoy no good, do all not go to one place? So, we know that concern for the next generation, fertility was very important. You hear people talk about the pubertal philosophy, where they want a lot of children. That was very important. That was a sign of blessing. Look at all the children that Job had. David had 19 named sons. So, 100 is the perfect number. So if you're blessed with 100 children, that's an abundant blessing. In the Bible, who lived the longest? Methuselah. What was it, 969 years. You would know Methuselah. He says, if you live 1,000 years, then he repeats it in verse 6. If you live 1,000 years twice, if you live twice as long as Methuselah, the longest person, you're going to the same place. It's all vanity. So he says it doesn't matter how much excess and abundance you have. You can't get more and more and more, and it's not going to make a difference. You're all going to go to the same place. So, riches don't make you exempt from misfortune, from the troubles of life. And he's getting cynical again, isn't he? And Job and Jeremiah have said a similar thing. They've lamented just like he does in verse 2, or verse 3. A stillborn child is better off. Job lamented, I wish I was never born. Solomon had all these riches, all this abundance, and he's saying, you know what? A miscarried child is better off than I am with this grand life I've lived, with the blessing of all the wisdom that God can give me. Now, we can understand Job saying that as he struggles with his trials, can't we? He's burdened with misfortune. Solomon's got all the trappings of abundance. And he's saying the same thing Job said in all this trial. So he's going to move on. 7 through 9 again. For all the toil of a man is for his mouth, yet his appetite is not satisfied. For what advantage has a wise man over the fool? And what does a poor man have who knows how to conduct himself before the living? Better is the sight of the eyes than the wandering of the appetite. This is also vanity and striving after wind. Can't be satisfied. How often have you driven down the road and you see a pasture of cows, and the cows are grazing? What are they consumed with? They're concerned with that next mouthful, aren't they? And they're looking down at their next bite. And in chapter 4, Solomon's already told us we're not any better than animals when we act this way. And he's saying, we're cattle. We're concerned with our next meal, but our appetite's not satisfied. I know Josh is a foodie. Josh has had some great meals. Josh, when you had one of those great meals, did that mean you were never hungry again? No. About an hour later, we're hungry again. We've got that hunger. He says, we work And these people worked because they wanted to eat. They had to have sustenance so that they could sustain life. And they were very concerned about that. So a man did toil for his mouth, and his appetite wasn't satisfied. But all this pursuing after wealth is exactly the same thing. It's endless. You get more, you gain that. Does it make you happy? No. Just like I had that great meal. Oh, I'm hungry again. When's breakfast? What's on the menu? If I get this accomplishment, if I'm blessed with this abundance, does that satisfy me? So what advantage does a wise man have over the fool? Well, the wise man knows how to conduct himself because, again, when we look at wise and fool, the wise is someone who's walking within the righteous ways of God. The foolish is not. But who's the poor man? What differentiates a poor man in this section? A poor man would be the one who makes himself poor. And again, it harkens back to chapter 4, verses 7 through 12, the concept of the miser, married to wealth. He is poor. He is living like a monk because he won't share his abundance. He doesn't care about it. He just wants me, me, me. And he's living this primitive life. And he's not enjoying the day. So, he is robbing himself of the joy of the present. Because he's not living righteously, he's robbing himself when he's called into judgment. The wandering appetite. What's a wandering appetite? Any clue? We want more. We want that vapor. We've got that dream. Back in the beginning of chapter 5, he talked about people going to God with their dreams because they want God's providence to conform to their wishes, to their will conforming to God's command. So they have this dream, this wandering appetite. Now, in the original language, you've got a contrast between mouth and appetite. Because while we think of appetite as something that we want to consume, and that hunger, appetite in the Hebrew is the same word for the soul. Now, read this passage again and substitute soul for appetite. For all the toil of a man is for his mouth. We're gaining all this abundance on earth. Our soul's not satisfied with stuff. Better is the sight of the eyes. Eat, drink, and enjoy the day than a wandering soul. If we are grateful for the providential gifts that God gives us for our toil, that we can eat and drink and rejoice and have inner contentment, is our soul satisfied? We find peace, don't we, with contentment. But if you don't have that, what do you have? You have a wandering soul. Because that wandering soul is trying to find contentment in a finite world. And it's impossible. Striving after the wind. We've heard this passage, this phrase before. It's used 9 times. It begins in chapter 1, verse 12. This is the last time that it's used. And this is sort of the division of the book. So while we had Solomon's experiment, he sort of stops talking about that around chapter 4, and all of a sudden he talks about, in chapter 5, about fearing God. but he still talks about the futility of life. But he's going to end that. This sort of ends chapter 1. So while I've had this wandering discourse, and if you look at 50 commentators, they're going to have 50 outlines for Ecclesiastes because it's a plate of spaghetti. But everyone divides it right here because all of a sudden, this part is striving after the wind. We're in week 8. We're 2/3 of the way through, but we're only at the halfway point of the book right now because this is foundational for everything that he's going to tell us afterward. All this is striving after the wind. Now he's going to tell us, learn from it. Human achievement is futile. No matter what achievements you have on this earth, you can't take them beyond the grave. You came to the earth with nothing. No matter how much abundance you have, you're going to leave the earth naked as you came, with nothing. So your human achievements, in light of eternity, are futile. And he gives us this summary verse in 9. Better is the sight of the eyes than the wandering of the appetite. This is also vanity and striving after wind. Human achievement is futile. But when you do have achievement, when God's providential hand does give you these blessings, eat, drink, and rejoice. So now he's going to move into the second half of the verse. And again, while we look at this wandering discourse, that summary in 6:9 about striving after the wind, that's exactly the midpoint. There's 111 verses before and 111 verses after. They didn't have verses, did they? But if you roll out the scroll, right there, dead center, chapter 6, verse 9, striving after the wind. So when we look closer, we see elegance within this rambling discourse that you don't pick up if you just look at casually as you read from start to finish. But there is much thought and much organization. Okay, beginning in verse 10. Whatever has come to be has already been named, and it is known what man is, and that he is not able to dispute with one stronger than he. The more words, the more vanity. And what is the advantage to the man? For who knows what is good for a man while he lives the few days of his vain life, which he passes like a shadow? For who can tell man what will be after him under the sun? So again, this is a resolute phase. The Greeks would use the term amorphate. Love the fate. Love what happens to you. If something happens to you, no matter how much you wish that misfortune hadn't befallen, you can't change it, accept it. Whatever has come to be has already been named. My wife uses the phrase, it is what it is. That's a modern translation of verse 10, isn't it? It is what it is. Things are going to happen through God's providential hand. We can't control it. We can't dispute with one stronger. Again, back in chapter 5, God is in heaven, we're on earth. Do we have any standing to dispute with him? No, we can't dispute with one stronger. The more words, the more vanity. That was in chapter 5, talking about addressing God. Keep your words few before God. Keep it simple. Don't try to get God to confront his providence to your desires. It's the same thing here. We see this recurring theme that's woven all throughout it. And he's going to ask us two questions. Who knows what is good for man while he lives a few days of this vain life which he passes? And who can tell man what will be after him under the sun? And that's what this next section is going to answer, those two questions. Chapters 7 and 8 are going to address the first question. Who knows what is good for man while he lives? And he's going to have some discourses on how to live life. And they're going to be Proverbs. They're going to hit back to the Proverbs of the book of Proverbs. But they're not going to be just pithy sayings. There's going to be a connectedness to them. And then chapter 9, 10, and 11. Who can tell man what will be after him under the sun? And these are the dark chapters of the book. This is when Solomon is really confronted with his mortality. He's in his deepest, darkest, most depressed mood. And it's a downer. Because again, the sky's the limit. He's not heaven bound. He's not thinking about that. It's a different concept for him. Beginning in this chapter, in chapter 7, we're not going to hear the phrase, striving after the wind. But the repeated things we're going to say are the concept, does not know or cannot discover. We only know what God shares with us, and he's going to confront this a lot. He's the wisest man on earth, but he's recognizing God knows stuff that I can't discover. I can't figure it out. And he's also going to talk in the Proverbs, especially in chapter 7, it is good, it is better than. So again, this is this wisdom he's conveying to this younger man. Don't do what I do. Don't live a life like I did. Do it differently. It is good if you do this. It's better than my life if you do these things. All right. A good name is better than precious ointment. The day of death than the day of birth. It's better to go to the house of mourning than a house of feasting. For this is the end of all mankind, and the living will lay it to heart. Sorrow is better than laughter, for by sadness of the face the heart is made glad. The heart of the wise is the house of the mourning, but the heart of fools is in the house of mirth. Throughout these verses, we're going to see puns and wordplay, but we don't appreciate them because we don't speak Hebrew. We're familiar with the concept of homonyms. If you eat that berry, we're going to bury you because that berry will kill you. Ointment and name would be the same as berry, B-E-R-Y, and B-U-R-Y in that language. They would sound exactly the same. So when we see these phrases in here, it's wordplay. And he's making a pun that they're going to appreciate. So we know what the house of mourning is. What's the house of feasting? A party, but do they have parties? They're subsistence farmers, 1000 BC. What's the house of feasting? Parable of the 10 virgins, where do they go to? A wedding feast. That's a common feast that they're all familiar with. Who's the center of attention at a wedding feast? Who's the center of attention at the house of mourning when you're confronted with your mortality? And on that, I will leave you. Thank you very much.